the first version of MicroMaster that came out in the early to mid 90s, for the first truly global drive product that we had. We were trying to, instead of just selling it in, Germany and the rest of Europe, we wanted to sell more in the Americas and Asia and elsewhere. Seemed to be on the radio, in the airplane, in the taxis, in everywhere I went.
Hello and welcome to the MICROMASTER Museum podcast, a podcast that celebrates a frequency converter sold more than 5 million times globally. I will be talking to people whose lives have been shaped by the MicroMaster and who have contributed to the success of this landmark converter. My name is Susanne and I'm collecting artifacts for a virtual MicroMaster Museum. Our first exhibition hall is going to be filled with stories and music, an audio space for customers, students, Siemens employees, and story lovers, where they can explore the world of MicroMaster. Let's go back in history first and see what the world was like when the MicroMaster was first released. The product was launched in the late 1990s and early 2000. Around this time, Volkswagen launched the new Beetle, one of its first retro design products. Looking into gaming, children and adults spent time on their Game Boy and Nintendo DS playing games involving Pokémons or Super Mario. In terms of sports, Michael Schumacher joined the Ferrari team and won 5 Formula One champion titles in a row. Now that we have explored the past a little, we will hear from Alex, who looks back on what it was like launching a new product more than 20 years ago. Alex is a colleague from Siemens in the US who worked in Congleton and Erlangen. He gained first-hand experience on the manufacturing process of MicroMaster and took the product on its global journey, the MicroMaster eventually becoming one of the most successful frequency converters worldwide. Listen to Alex pointing out what was special about the MicroMaster product launch.
It was really more of trying to take a new product to some new markets. So, it was the first really mass-produced drive that we had. There was a lot less hands-on as far as building the drive was concerned. Much more of it was automated. So it was designed to be easier to manufacture than prior generations or prior types of products that we'd had. And as a result of that, it was almost a step change in terms of reliability as well. That the less people that touched the components whilst it was being built, the better the longevity or reliability of the product was going to be. That said, when we take this product to new markets, whether it's the US or to Asia or wherever, they see environments that they wouldn't have seen in the factory in Congleton, that maybe they're not installed quite as well, or they're installed in a totally different manner than we were expecting. They hang them on a wall outside and forget that it rains, or, they don't use shielded cables when we're expecting people to, and things like that. So there were a number of things which we learned as we went along.
I learned that once the product had been launched, the team discovered how customers were in fact using the MicroMaster. It was up to Siemens experts to introduce the drive's technology and teach customers about drives, their functionalities, and how to use them. Listen what Alex has to say.
I think it was something we discovered after, the initial launch, and we put it out there saying, here's this new thing, come buy it. And people did. And then we discovered the things that were really missing, whether it's documentation or education even. A drive is not a switch. People in the past were using contactors, direct online starters, or soft starts. Well, a drive is very different to those things. You can't wire them the same way. And if you do, it's a recipe for, unintended consequences. So we had to learn what some of those things were that people were doing, and then adjust our documentation and our training capabilities to teach people what they really should be doing. Really, it started from scratch, and every country pretty much came up with their own things. If I look at things that happened, say, here in the US on the later versions of MicroMaster, they don't like to use shielded cable here. They don't buy filtered drives here. They're not necessarily reading the documentation before they try and start it up. They just call somebody and say, help me start this up. Well, while somebody on the phone can help you go through parameters and do the correct settings, what they can't do via the phone is to tell you how to wire it up properly. Keeping your control wires and your power wires separate, using shielded cable, making sure that you've scraped the paint off the back of your cabinet before grounding your earth screw and things like that. So we had a lot of issues in the early days with people not taking any kind of precautions against EMC or electromagnetic interference. And drives are pretty good at creating electromagnetic interference. So unless you take those precautions, you're not going to get a reliable system. So one of the biggest challenges we had was just teaching people over time how to install drives in a proper manner. And of course, this doesn't just apply to our drives. It applies to everybody's drives, but we were new to the market here. So
today we are all used to globally integrated service hotlines and tools to support these processes. In the 1990s, things were very different. Listen to what Alex has to say.
Yeah, I mean, in the very early days, the hotline was, an office in Congleton. There was an office in Erlangen, and somebody called whatever the local number was, and we wrote it down on a piece of paper and we put it in a file, right? And then later on, we had some, Outlook-based call management thing. So we would make notes in the Outlook journal function. And then, later on, we set up the global hotline, which is, now there's one in Johnson City, Tennessee. There was one in Erlangen. There was one in Singapore. And this wasn't just for drives. So this also was a hotline for the FA products, so all the PLCs. But basically it was the initial follow the sun system. So 24 hours a day, there was someone on a hotline who knew about the products that you had.
Next, Alex explains what it was like communicating across different locations while it was not possible to always rely on the internet. A system was needed that worked with or without internet. Tools were needed that supported a workday that was online at times and also offline.
Right. I mean, we didn't have the technology. Reliable internet in the mid-90s was, nobody knew what you were talking about. I mean, we just didn't have those kind of things. So, the very first thing we used for spreading information from the factory to the hotlines was Lotus Notes. And that allowed us to have different information available for different people. So the people who worked on the hotline could create or submit FAQs, as could the factory, and we could make them available to all the hotlines around the globe. We also had some different repair centers. There was a repair center in Erlangen. There was another one in China. There was one in India. There was one in the US. And we could make circuit diagrams available for those repair centers, so they knew, where the components go and how they connect together. And we had all the part numbers for all the different items, the spare parts that we made available for them to buy, whether it was IGBTs or capacitors or whatever. And we could make some things visible to some people and some things visible to other people. And the key issue there was, back in those days, the internet was much less reliable than it is today. So we had to have a system that would work whether you had internet or not. So the Lotus Notes kept a local copy. So if the internet wasn't functioning, you had that to use. And then whenever the internet came back on, it would download whatever the latest version is from the factory that we've just submitted. So it was quite a revolutionary type tool back in the day.
The MicroMaster product series will be discontinued soon. Alex has a few points highlighting why even happy MicroMaster customers should now start planning their switch to Synamics.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that the MicroMaster 4 was the last of the MicroMaster generations that we created. And it had, a simple VF drive version. It had a drive for pumps and fans, a MicroMaster 430, and it had the MicroMaster 440, which was our sort of top of the line, including vector control and closed loop and Profibus and all those things. And at the time it was released, this was a market leading product in terms of flexibility. We had free blocks in it, timers and counters and AND gates, OR gates and things that we could build up simple logic in the drive. And that was really cool when we first released it. And then over time, of course, competitors come up with new products and we come up with new products. And, we released the Synamics G120 back in 2006. The first variants of that came out. So, 4 or 5 years after the last MicroMaster was when we first released G120. And we also released the G110 back in 2005. And those two drive families really continued in parallel for the next 10 or so years before we started to wind down a little bit on the MicroMaster. And the main reason for that is that they didn't fully overlap. So, the MicroMaster was still able to do some things that the G120 couldn't. So over time, now, obviously the Synamics can do everything the MicroMaster can do, and it does it better. Because it's got new technology in it. We've got safety integrated in it. We've got Profinet integrated in it. We've got Ethernet IP for anybody who's got like a Rockwell PLC system. So we've got new features in the drive that were unimaginable all those years ago. And most factories are switching to Ethernet-based communications. It's all about getting data out of the systems, being able to act upon that data. And an Ethernet-based communication system is much better at doing that than what we had in the past.
Great summary. And a call for action and retrofit for anyone running their application on a MicroMaster. I would like to thank Alex for this interview and his insights into the early years of the MicroMaster. Today, we very much admire startups for their willingness to explore new things and how they manage the unknown. I believe the colleagues involved in the MicroMaster product launch had a very similar mindset. And as mentioned in the introduction, the virtual museum will include music that is part of the MicroMaster story. I asked Alex which song he personally associates with the MicroMaster, and he would like us to add as an artifact to the MicroMaster Museum.
It's kind of weird. Back in the mid 90s, I think around 96, I was traveling the globe doing service for MicroMasters based out of Erlangen. I was at the time, and the song which seemed to be on the radio, in the airplane, in the taxis, in everywhere I went was the Macarena. Which at the time drove me absolutely nuts because I was sick to death of hearing it. But now it just makes me smile. It takes me back to a more simple time, I guess.
Good choice of music and a one-hit wonder. Very much in contrast to our Siemens converters. They are long-term champions. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed this podcast. The next episode is in the making, so do join me in a few weeks' time for episode number 2.